Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second HeatSource webinar. My name is Emma Church. I'm an Impact Manager here at Built Environment Smarter Transformation, and I am the lead delivery on the HeatSource programme, which is the low carbon heat cluster builder that we're delivering on behalf of Scotland's enterprise agencies. Our aim is about building a security, capability and competency within Scotland's supply chain for the low carbon heat sector. So today you're joining our webinar, which we've titled Lessons from Scotland in Low Carbon Heating and Cooling, where you've got a fantastic opportunity to hear about some of Scotland's flagship low carbon heat projects from the companies involved in those projects. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get in to hear from our speakers. This session is being recorded and will be available to view on the BEST YouTube channel early next week, but you will also receive an email with a summary and lots of links and a link to our recording, likely tomorrow. If you would like to ask any questions or leave any comments, you can click on the question section in the control panel, type in your question and press send, and we will use those for our Q&A session at the end. There will be a couple of poll questions throughout, and they'll appear automatically on your screen, and you'll be given about 30 seconds to answer. Finally, your feedback is really valuable to us, and we'll take all your questions and comments on board, even if we don't get a chance to answer them all, and we will get back to you. So again, we have feedback at the end of the session, so if you can fill that in, that would be much appreciated. So today, unfortunately, you should have been expecting to hear from Paul Shearin from Procast Energy Services. Unfortunately, he's had to pull out of the webinar today, so we have a bit of extra time, and I'll cover over some of the upcoming kind of webinars and key events in the low carbon heat sector that should be of interest to you as an audience, and some links for you to join and register them, some of which are later on this week and some later this month. And we'll also have extra time for Q&A, so please don't be shy in the chat box there. So first up today, we have Dave Pearson. I'm sure you're all familiar with him and his role as Director at Star Renewable Energy. He rejoined the Star team in 2008 in the new role of Director of Innovation. Dave's remit was to continue Star's extensive and innovative development work to maximise customer value in all of Star's markets. And with their history of high efficiency refrigeration technology since 1970, this led them towards heat pumps. Over a decade later, and mainly international recognised projects, Dave has begun looking at the art of the possible in high temperature district heating size heat pumps and the barriers to be crossed if these are to become the new normal. So without further ado, I'll be happy to pass over to Dave, and he can talk us through one of their key projects.
Thanks, Emma. Just a quick check. Can you see my slides okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much for organising this and giving me an opportunity to share really the hard work of many colleagues. I know a few are online today, so they can give themselves a pat on the back for taking crazy ideas and making them work. And that's probably, if we stopped right now, that's the key takeaway. Heat pumps do work, and they can harvest heat from various places that previously we might have thought were a little bit unusual, but it's absolutely possible. So this is the story of, in principle, one of the projects, but then really the challenge Emma sent me was, how are we going to see more of these? We don't want Queen's Quay down in Clydebank to be the last big heat pump in Scotland. We want it to be the first big heat pump and of many. And of course, not just about Scotland, it's about the rest of the UK and Europe beyond and beyond that. We've certainly engaged with companies all around the world, from Alaska to New Zealand to Eastern Europe, huge opportunities, and the Middle East, and I'll say some interesting things around warmer climates and heat pumps as well. So why bother? It's a broad, complicated thing, but I picked up this graphic from the European Heat Pump Association at some point along the last 14 years. And you know, when I first got involved in it, everybody was talking about renewable energy. We didn't really talk about energy efficiency so much. Clean air wasn't a huge topic, And supply security had kind of been forgotten about for quite a long time, and obviously it's much more topical these last few months. Local jobs, quite clearly, everybody wants to be in good employment, and switching our energy is a terrific opportunity in that. Every day I see job adverts on LinkedIn for whether it's consultancies or companies expanding in this area, and that's a huge opportunity. And a maybe slightly harder one to conceive, smart grids. It's really about interfacing the demand side of electricity consumption with the generating capacity. We've gone in the UK, I think somebody once said, from 60 power stations to 60,000 power stations that are much more variable. Heat pumps have a huge opportunity to help balance that by being ultra flexible and being able to switch off at very short notice, or modulate the capacity and use thermal storage. And we'll hear some great stuff about thermal storage later on as well. So, but why is heat really the key thing? It's a huge part of our carbon emissions. If climate change is all about carbon dioxide is mainly about burning fossil fuels, and burning fossil fuels is mainly about heating stuff, certainly in a Scottish or UK context. So we're aiming at the big chunk of the challenge, and that's really the important bit. This isn't just a niche little afterthought. It's a huge bit, and the progress has been poor. It's really not achieved very much. The numbers that get put up round about low carbon heat probably are mainly biomass, which had a tremendous trend for a period, and it's maybe not quite gone forward the way people hoped. Perhaps air quality concerns crept in, and that undermined things. Perhaps it was supply chain challenges, but it's really drifted off the agenda, and very seldom do I hear people talking about it so much. That's not to say it's not got a place, but it's really gone off the radar a little bit. So the other reason that there's a big challenge with heat pumps is we're using heat in lots of different places, lots of spaces, at least 6 different bits going around the wheel, from the classic tenement in Glasgow to the city centre of Glasgow and the high density commercial areas, to new parts that are being built around the city, whether it's next to the science centre or further downstream. New build housing estates, still plenty of houses being built, and they all need to do clean heat. And then, of course, fixing all the old houses, the existing building stock. So very, very different. And at the 11 o'clock position, industrial heat sources, a colossal amount of fossil fuels burned as part of industrial processes, whether it's brewing or distilling or food manufacture. Huge demand for that, and it all needs to decarbonize, and in many places it can do with heat pumps. So we're seeing it across all different sectors, and we're now beginning to see people move into 100 plus 160 degree heat pumps are being talked about, and there's been some really good pilot projects done. So lots more to come on that in the coming years. So that's part of the reason it's very challenging. Whenever there's conversations about heat pumps, people invariably start getting mixed up between the different bits, and they're all relevant, but they've all got a separate place. So when I think about heat pumps, I'm not thinking about the actual kit. I'm thinking about the business proposition. And for me, any heat pump needs to have a heat source. You need to have the right technology in place. You need to, of course, to have a good understanding of what the heat demand is, and that has to stack up in an economic sense. I don't think we're going to get terribly far if we're suggesting that heat pumps are deployed, but they'll be 3 times the cost of burning gas. That's going to be a tough gig. So very specifically, this part of the presentation today is about high density areas of Glasgow. So slightly zoomed out, that area there that you can see. If we look at it a little bit closer, it's about the big buildings, probably over 5 or 6 stories. There's some much larger ones being built in the city centre, and for obvious reasons, it's a little bit difficult to put individual heat pumps into every single building of these, for various reasons, and this isn't a limited amount, but some aspects about the sheer amount of heat demand that's required. We're not going to go around Glasgow and do external wall insulation of all these old historic buildings. Limited free space round about for any external works, whether it's in the ground or in the buildings themselves. Complex ownership structures where you might have a building and there's a a difference between the ownership and tenancy. And then, of course, the electrical grid. Most of the heat pumps that are being deployed are using electricity, and you've got to get the electricity to the heat pumps. And if the closer you are to the building, the more stressed the grid tends to be. So perhaps centralizing the heat pumps is a way of doing that for these particular areas. So again, thinking about what the picture looks like in terms of those 4 parts of the Venn diagram. So what have we done? Well, this is a quick flyby. Video speaks louder than words. Pictures have kind of stepped in the way in between. But this is Queen's Quay looking east up the river, the Clyde estuary. On the left is the energy centre, the college in the background, and the swimming pool behind that. And inside, really what I've tried to convey is this is a big chunky heat pump. This isn't something that sits perhaps in my garage through there. There's a Kensa heat pump, but or anything outside the house as an air source heat pump. This is chunky kit for chunky jobs, and that's what was designed in our factory, manufactured in our factory, designed in Glasgow as well, and deployed in Clydebank, and subsequently also in Bristol city centre. And we've done overseas projects from Norway to Switzerland and Belgium and France. So plenty of activity over the piece, but always there's this little thing going on about how do you make this happen as a business model. So great project down there on the right hand side. You can see the thermal store, which is giving us a little bit of ability to move around when we're buying electricity, and that's going to be a significant part of the future. But it's a great building, and it's part of the community down there. They've really done well to make it stand out. And again, though, you can see it's chunky kit that's being deployed in these big capacities. And what's it serving? Well, this is the Wheatley Group's new social housing block, and that's one of, ultimately, I think there'll be 40 different buildings all served from these 2 heat pumps. Everything from the town hall to the sports centre, the Jubilee Hospital is on the plans as well. And it's really just about bringing pipes in the ground to these buildings and connecting them up and bringing that heat demand back to the central location and really sweating the asset as much as possible. So to the second bit, moving from is this possible? Yes, it's possible, but what has to happen for it to be repeated? The project at Queen's Quay has some very peculiar circumstances around it. The renewable heat incentive existed in the UK's policy map at the time, and that basically paid twice the cost of burning gas at about 2.5 pence not to burn gas. So big subsidies over 20 years to do this. And then there was added subsidies in Scotland. It was through the low carbon infrastructure transition programme, and down south the Heat Networks Innovation Programme is supporting local authorities typically to deploy heat networks, and hopefully with low carbon heat sources, and a prime example of that is district heating. But these are not the long-term aspirations. So what do you need to repeat Queen's Quay in different bits? Well, the first bit is you need to have a surety, a heat offtake surety, and this basically means you need to be certain you're going to sell heat from the district heating. And that might sound really obvious if we realise that heat is a big part of the carbon footprint and we need to change it. But at the moment, the policy landscape is very weak. It's really not even for brand new buildings, is it saying don't install gas boilers. So we've got to get past this legacy piece, or turn it into a legacy, frankly, and start moving forwards. And that means going around every building in Glasgow and saying, hey guys, what's the plan for the future? Why don't you join district heating? Pledge to do that, and we'll deliver district heating as a city. So whether it's led by Glasgow City Council or whether it's led by international partners, the big energy companies are all sort of dancing around this space. But basically, somebody has to bring huge amounts of investment into this. And the good thing is that means jobs. 75% of the cost of district heating is in the labour to deploy the pipework. The pipes themselves are not terribly expensive, so huge deployment costs for this, and then of course district heating and all the power supply upgrades, etc., etc. So, and that essentially in other parts of the world is funded from pension funds. So there is a colossal opportunity to bring billions of pounds of investment into the UK market doing that. The second bit though is, as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be economically viable. And what people maybe don't realise is that we're making electricity from the most modern wind farms at about 5 pence per kilowatt hour. But by the time you buy it 2 or 3 miles down the road in a city, it's at the moment you'd be contracting around about 30 to 40 pence per kilowatt hour. That's policy costs that are added on top of the electricity price. Now, some of it's for the transmission, but actually most of it's different rules that have got a bit mixed up over the last couple of decades. And really what we need to see is that if we're buying electricity at the right time when it's windy, we should be paying closer to 5p. So if the policy came in on those lines, we would see the economic case, and if we've partnered that with the demand case, then you'll see developers stepping up and doing it. So I'm going to give it a yes for the first bit and a maybe for the second bit, because there are quite well travelled plans already. You know, put aside everything you see in the news about politics and what's going on, the civil servants work away in the background trying to bring new policies along, and both in Scotland and the rest of the UK. There's work being done on zoning, which basically is saying all the cities have to decide which bits of the city suit district heating and which bits don't, and think about how best to make that happen. So yes for the first bit and maybe for the second bit. The piece of work that's underway is under the banner of REMA, and that's the Renewable Electricity Market Assessment, and that's basically looking at the way that we charge for electricity. We need to move forwards from ending up with too much electricity in one part of the country and not enough in the other, and a common price across the piece that stops suppliers offering preferential rates to help people use electricity at a better time. So what should large consumers do? You know, if it was a university, for example, or a housing association, really it's about demanding support from the local authority. Don't try and solve the problems yourself. Be collaborative and understand your building stock. You need to know how much heat you're using and at what temperature the water is being used, and think about what's possibly going to happen. So speak to the local authority and say, look, we'd be really up for district heating if this came to our corner of the world. And understand your building stock, you know, how much heat is needed is a key number, and how to do that. And think about the neighbours. Think, you know, all the buildings round about you, wherever your building might be, have got the same challenge. So don't try and do it by yourselves. You know, be collaborative, get speaking to the neighbours, and try and work out how that could go. Slightly flippant graphic from me, because I keep hearing that some buildings aren't suited for heat pumps, and I eventually found a picture of one on the internet that I don't think is really suited to a heat pump. But apart from that, whether it's small heat pumps or large heat pumps, any building in the UK could be heated with a heat pump, whether it's an individual heat pump just for that building, or a couple of heat pumps as a cluster, or part of a wider citywide district network. It's possible that all the buildings could be heated with that. Now, the next question that comes up with heat pumps in the last couple of years is, what about cooling? And really, it depends where you are. So where do you live? What sort of building vintage have you got? Does the building actually need air conditioning? Does it not need air conditioning? And some would argue that we might see these coupled together, where there's shared ambient networks where heat is being moved around from building to building. A slight caution from a UK context is it needs to balance every day, so that the amount of heat going into the network has to equal the amount being taken out, and that has to happen on super warm days where it's cooling only and not much heat demand, but also has to happen on super cold days. So we've got to make sure our networks are designed for this, and maybe cut through some of the excitement around what seems like a good idea. But let's get into it in more detail. So going back to Glasgow, and this graphic's taken from the Scottish Government's heat map, which basically lets you look at any part of the country and say what's the heat demand. And I drew a very simple box from Clydebank right up to the Kingston Bridge in Glasgow, and said what's the heat demand, and it comes out at 1.39 terawatt hours. That is significantly bigger than the Queen's Quay capacity, probably a factor of 50 larger than Queen's Quay at its absolute maximum output could take. It's less though than the amount of heat that's available from the river that runs through, and in fact the tidal reach of the river is way up in the sort of Gorbals area of Glasgow. So actually it's the tide flushing in and out twice a day is bringing that ambient heat that can be harvested with the heat pump. So we've got enough capacity in the river we're building more and more wind turbines, and it tends to be windy when it tends to be chilly. And obviously there's some gaps that have to be accounted for. But broadly speaking, when there's a heat demand, there's an opportunity to generate electricity and then to harvest that. So if we get the electricity networks correct, get the pricing correct, and then of course start this colossal building program of district heating through the cities and connecting these buildings up, joining the dots, and it should be possible. So what about the Middle East? I touched on that, and this was a piece of work we did quite a long time ago that hasn't come to pass, but just to give a concept of thinking differently, and how if we start thinking about energy as a commodity rather than this sort of burn gas to heat stuff up. We were asked by some consultants to look at a city in the Middle East, and they wanted cooling, quite understandably so. But they also were wanting fresh drinking water. You could deploy the sort of heat pumps that we've done in Clydebank, where the cooling part was used for cooling the city, but the hot part was used to desalinate seawater, and just totally turn the whole equation on its head. So the point is, if we start thinking about what the challenge is a little bit differently and not base it just in fossil fuel, we might see a completely different outcome from what we've been doing before. So I'm going to leave it at that, other than to say I've been asked to mention this wherever I go. It's coming up to COP27, COP26. It seems like just yesterday, but there's a virtual walk being planned from Glasgow all the way to Egypt, where the walk is, and colleagues in Star will be taking part in that, and I'll be speaking at this kick-off in the town hall in Glasgow, as it's been called. Just to share some of the story in an international piece. And that just serves to show how much interest there is in heat pumps and the way that we can deploy heat pumps into our communities and into our economy, frankly, and create a different outcome, a cleaner outcome, more jobs, and really just help with this transition towards a low carbon future. So I'll leave it at that, Emma, if that's okay, and let you tee up the next speaker, who I think is Matt.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dave. And I'll be sure to share those links, and we'll get that event put onto the HeatSource website. And we've got a newsletter going out tomorrow, so I'll make sure that we pop that in there as well. Fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Dave. And you know, as always, some great advice in there as well from anyone from our audience from a kind of local authority or kind of big building, big heat user capacity. So yeah, fantastic, and also great use of Scotland's heat map. You should see just now into the chat box, anyone that's interested in accessing Scotland's heat map, there should be a link popped into there, and again we will put that in the roundup email that goes out tomorrow as well. So if you're wanting to have a look at you know, Scotland's heat map data and play around with that, then that's where to go. Fantastic, thanks again. And again, just based on kind of what we've heard about, it would be good to hear from you guys as an audience in terms of what sector you're in. So we are just going to do a really quick poll, and if you can take part, that would be great. So which of the following best describes your organisation's area of work? That's great, so you have about 20-30 seconds. So are you sort of installation and industry? Are you trade body or a trade association, academic or public sector? We'd love to hear. Just a few more seconds on that. Fantastic, thank you so much. And they were also great. We've got lots of people from the trades, from industry joining us today. And those of you that have indicated that you're from public sector, again, like I said, some great advice there from Dave. And yes, please access the Scotland's heat map if you'd like to have a look at what your local area's energy consumption looks like. So next up, so we're kind of scaling down a little bit in terms of heat kind of projects here. So I'm really happy to introduce Matthew Black, who is the Business Development Manager at Kensa Contracting. So Matthew has been working in the renewables and energy and low carbon heat sector in Scotland since 2008, and he's the current Scottish Business Development Manager for Kensa Contracting, part of the Kensa Group. who deliver ground source heating systems to domestic and non-domestic buildings, offering long-term sustainable solutions to the climate emergency and fuel poverty by providing low-cost, low-carbon warmth to Scotland's communities. So over to you, Matthew. I'm really excited to hear about your flagship project.
Thanks very much indeed, Emma. Hope you can all see me and see the slides in front of you. What I'm going to do is just take people through a bit of an introduction into who we are, who Kensa are, and ground source heat pumps and some of the projects that we're installing in Scotland. So just as an introduction to let you know who Kensa are, so the Kensa group is made up of 3 companies. Firstly, we are a dedicated manufacturer of ground source heat pumps. We have a factory just outside Truro in Cornwall. That factory and our head office is on top of an abandoned tin mine, flooded tin mine, and we actually have pipe in that flooded tin mine, and we're using that heat to heat our factories and head office there. So Kensa heat pumps in that factory, we make about 20 to 30 heat pumps a day, and we supply them throughout the whole of the UK, and then provide other products and technical support to those contractors. Kensa Contracting has been around about 10 years, and that started to really facilitate the wider rollout of ground source heat pumps, initially through social housing, but increasingly through volume builds, new build housing, and through retrofit programs, some of them tackling fuel poverty and some of them more carbon emission focused. And then the third company that we have is Kensa Utilities. That's set up as an infrastructure asset company to basically finance boreholes and ground array and the infrastructure. Like any infrastructure required, such as broadband or water or ground source, requires a bit more investment. So Kensa Utilities is set up to provide funding and financing for that infrastructure, and the group as a whole is part owned by Legal and General Capital. So ground source, historically, not been too much ground source heat pumps installed in Scotland historically. It works so we have pipe work in the ground. Normally that is a vertical borehole, and through that pipe work we're circulating water and antifreeze, and the temperature coming from that ground typically is about 10 degrees. And the beauty of that is no matter what the time of year and what the air temperature outside is, we'll always be providing that heat pump with about 10 degrees. And that's important because the efficiency and therefore the grid requirements, the demand on the grid infrastructure, how much it costs people to run their heat pumps, and the carbon dioxide emitted from the system is dependent on the incoming temperature and the outgoing temperature. So we can provide 10 degrees all year round regardless of what the air temperature is outside. And importantly, we're typically providing about 2/3 of the energy for heating and hot water comes from the ground, and 1/3 comes from our wonderful Scottish renewable electricity, and that's just used to run a compressor and to run the heat pumps. 2/3 of the energy is effectively free from the ground, and 1/3 coming from electricity. So why ground source? So it's unaffected by air temperature and air humidity. These heat pumps normally sit inside in building or inside somebody's home. Another white box that's just pretty much a replacement for a gas boiler. Instead of connected to the gas pipe, it's connected to a borehole array. So just a different set of pipes and a different white box. So we can also provide cooling. So as well as taking a large volume of heat to the ground and compressing that and providing that for heating and hot water, we can also take heat from a home and put that back in the ground. So we can also provide cooling as well. We can also use other waste heat applications. So we might be able to use open source, so from some water source, an underground aquifer. We have a large project that uses an underground aquifer, but we can also use waste heat from industry. We can also use water source, so we can either float pipe, closed loop pipe in a large water source, or we can extract that water and use that to heat buildings. So the heat pumps sit inside. They last about 20 to 25 years because they're not open to the elements. And once we drill a borehole, it's there for around about 100 years or more. So it's more of a longer term strategy, a more sustainable legacy project, not something that you would be thinking about having to replace in the short term. There's no fans like HeatSource, and from a heat networks point of view, if this is part of a heat network, it's normally connected to the electricity supply that's coming into the building. So you pay for what you use through your electricity bill, and there's no need for metering and billing. So these are the heat pumps that we manufacture in our factory. The first one is the shoebox, which is by far our biggest selling product. Its main thing is that it's very small, so it's ideal for social housing and housing in general. The 3 kilowatt version can sit in a cupboard underneath a kitchen sink, and it provides all the heating and hot water for domestic properties. And then we have the Evo, which is for slightly bigger properties, and then we have our Q80, which you can bank together for more commercial projects. So sometimes we'll also be providing heat to things like leisure centres, public buildings, hotels, and so on. And that's where we might have a few larger heat pumps banked together to serve those projects. So normally when we're talking ground source, 90% of our projects are closed loop boreholes. And that basically means that we dig a hole, and then we have a drill which drills a hole vertically down. The hole is about 6 inches across, but is up to 250 meters deep. And once that is drilled, we insert pipework into there. We grout the hole back up, and then we fill the pipework with water and glycol, and we install those into many different sites. So sometimes we'll go to a site and it might be contaminated, or it might have mine workings in it. We also drill in the public highway, we drill in car parks, anywhere essentially you can drill a borehole. And we do this in urban environments as well. So it's fairly quick and fairly space efficient, and once it's installed, that borehole will be there for a very long time. So I'm just going to run you through a very quick animation. So we do quite a lot of tower block projects and retrofit projects. So this just shows you the installation process from a tower block. So we'll survey the property in terms of its heating and hot water requirements, and we'll look at the local geology. And we'll check underground services that may be there, and then we will come with the drill rig and drill holes in the grounds. And typically we don't need one borehole per property, but typically about one borehole per 2 to 5 properties. And that means that it gives us this communal boreholes, cluster of boreholes. And this is the kind of depth we go. And these drill rigs are on the road 24/7, 365 days a year, and doing this day in and day out. We then insert the pipework into the hole, and we grout that hole back up, and then we trench the pipework together to a common underground manifold. And this is the only part of the project. If you come to one of our sites, we do quite a lot of visits as well. If you come along to one of our sites, this is the only bit of the project that you will see is that manhole cover. We then reinstate the ground, and from that manhole cover, we'll go into, in this instance, a tower block. So we'll go into the basement, and we'll insert pipework through the basement. So remember, typically this water is about 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. So it's not insulated for heat loss. There's no heat loss coming from that pipework. And then we'll tee off to individual heat pumps in each property. This is good as it's very energy efficient, as we're only upgrading the heat at the point of use. We're not circulating high temperatures of hot water around, which is common from traditional central plant district heating systems. And each heat pump is connected to the electricity consumer board in that property, so there's no individual metering and billing required, which is important if you're a local authority or housing association and don't want to be metering or billing your tenants. So inside the property, we'll connect to the heat pump, and on top of that will either be a hot water cylinder or a Sunamp hot water battery. And then from there, we'll provide heating through normal radiators and hot water. And we can also bypass the heat pump and provide cooling through a fan coil. So we're just passing chilled water through a fan coil, and that could be providing cooling through the summer months if it was required. So that's the kind of projects we do. I'm going to show you some very exciting pictures now of drill rigs. So this is a project that we've installed for West Lothian Council in Livingston. This project was taken on a very dreek day in February. So this is the drill rig, and that's a completed borehole there. And that project is for, it's like an adult care centre, so it's supported adult living. So it's about 17 different housing blocks connected to about 10 boreholes. This is a larger project. So this is a larger project in Bristol. So this is 200 new build houses, and this is us on site before the houses have been built. And this is us connecting all the connected pipework to the manifolds. And then on a new build site, we'll come up through the slab, and this is the borehole connection, and this is the point in the house where the heat pump and hot water tank will sit typically. So the advantages are that there is no heat loss through the pipework, as it's a low temperature system. As such, it's actually classed as a 5th generation heat network. There's no energy centre, no plant room, nothing to look after, no heat interface units, no heat metering or billing, and then the residents of this system are free to shop around on the market for their electricity tariff. And typically, when we're replacing electric storage heaters, we're able to save residents about 40 or 50% on their heating bill. And then compared to gas boilers, we are saving substantial amounts of CO2, so around about 90% in some cases. So a few case studies on other projects we've installed. So this is one for Grampian Housing Association in Ballater, which Ballater is the coldest place in the UK, so I'm told. And on this project, we had granite, which is very hard rock type. So we had a slightly bigger drill to get through that granite, but granite is also very good for ground source because it's very highly conductive bedrock. So we needed less boreholes to provide the same amount of heating for this. So this is 10 boreholes heating 24 new apartments, and it's an old converted school there, which has been turned into flats, and then also some new build masonettes. And the ground array is underneath that car park. So all the boreholes are underneath that car park and underneath the pathway going down the side of the building as well. And in that picture, you can see the Kensa shoebox and a hot water tank, which will be in the cupboard in the resident's home. Some other projects we're doing, I mentioned the project in West Lothian. We've also just finished drilling on a project in central Edinburgh, which is a refurbished church, 19th century church turned into flats, and also another new block of flats. And those properties will also have Sunamp hot water batteries in them, connected with our Kensa shoebox system. And there's other larger projects coming very shortly across Scotland. A lot of these are new builds, but we have got one or two retrofit as well. So everybody thinks that the ground source, you need a lot of land, you can only do it in the countryside. and it's just not true. You can do this in urban environments and suburban environments, rural locations, and you can do it for high-rise tower blocks, new flats, any type of housing you care to think of, and commercial buildings as well. So the future for us is really about deploying this technology on a street-by-street basis. And that means that a lot of our existing homes, if you imagine the typical street, most of our properties in the UK are terraced housing, some form of terraced housing, and we see this as how we can deploy heat networks in these areas. And this is providing the infrastructure and funding that ahead of time, so that when people are ready to ditch their gas combi boilers and they're no longer allowed to fit another combi boiler, they can then tap into our heat network, and we will provide the upfront capital to install the infrastructure, and then for the heat pumps themselves, the customers will be offered support or finance or a way to make that affordable for them, and that's how we see this being rolled out street by street. We're actually doing this on a village in Cornwall at the moment, where we've got 300 residents all signed up to take 5th generation heat network using shared ground loop arrays across that whole community. So something that we're trialing just now. We'd love to trial it in Scotland as well, and then roll out across our communities. A bit of word on funding. So Scotland is people don't realise how fantastic Scotland is for funding sometimes. So a lot of this funding is not available in other parts of the UK. So there is funding out there for heat network projects and retrofit into social housing. And if you are thinking of a project or thinking of decarbonising a community where you are, I really urge you to do some engine searches on these funds, as they could really help you deliver those projects. And we are there as well as support, and feel free to come to us with any questions, and we can help you install these systems. So that's me really. That's me at a close. There's my contact details, and I'll leave Emma to come back on and present the next presenter.
Thanks so much, Matthew. That's really great, and I think hopefully there's lots of our audience that have maybe learned something new about Glasgow's heat pumps and their applicability, their diversity. I think typically, especially in the domestic setting, people very much nowadays are thinking of air source heat pumps, and sadly that technology would have been covered in terms of case studies with Paul at Procast Energy Services, but we'll be sure to link for anyone that's interested in the kind of air source heat pump model in terms of retrofit or new build, link some of his case studies. But again, yeah, great advice there on different funding mechanisms and how financially this can make sense, and what benefits there are of doing these projects in Scotland. So again, please reach out to Matthew, or if you'd like to reach out to ourselves at HeatSource, our email address is heatsource@be-st.build, and we're happy to put you in touch with any of our speakers. But thanks again for your insights, Matthew. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
So next up, we have David Wright from Sunamp, that were name dropped in Matthew's presentation, for anyone that heard that there. So obviously Sunamp, slightly different technology. We're not talking about heat pump, but we're talking about a thermal battery. But just to introduce David, we have who has a wealth of experience and knowledge from his 30 years working in the plumbing and heating industry. He's Sunamp's national sales manager covering Scotland. And during previous roles, lots of experience working in partnership with all levels, from trades from installers to senior management and merchant groups. So lots of experience there, and also from working with architects, consultants, local authority and housing association specifiers, and regional and national house builders. So this combined with a technical background, so Dave has a broad and deep understanding of the plumbing industry and the different requirements of different professionals working within the sector. So yeah, here today to talk about Sunamp's project and product offerings. Yep, over to you, David.
Thank you, Emma. That was an absolute glowing tribute. Thank you. Couldn't have wrote that better myself. So I just want to say thank you all for taking the time out to join us today. And I'm just going to run through Sunamp and what we do, which is thermal storage, which is slightly different to the sort of thermal storage that you're used to. So as Dave mentioned right at the start, when it comes to world energy consumption, it's absolutely spot on. 46% of what we use in the world is heat. So it's very much a case of although we're constantly improving how we generate electricity, especially via renewable sources, it needs to remember that these are renewable sources and therefore intermittent. And if we are to transition away from carbon-based fuels, then how we store energy also has to change. And when it comes to hot water storage in particular, it hasn't changed for centuries. And the water is heated and it's stored, which always results in the need for large storage containers such as cylinders and big thermal stores and calorifiers and such like. So it's very much a case of here of showing you what is available in the market just now and what you can do. So for you that haven't heard of Sunamp, Sunamp believes in decarbonising the world via affordable renewable energy for all, and the only way we can do that is sustaining that by compact thermal storage. And to Sunamp are an Edinburgh-based company. Our factory and sales offices are down at McMurray, just near Trinent, just outside Edinburgh. And it was founded back in 2006 by our CEO, Andrew Bissell. And it was through his vision that he wanted to change how we do things. And he's seen the opportunity that why not use phase change materials to facilitate the use of non-carbon fuels in the home. And so, and what he developed was sorry, I've just jumped a slide there. What he developed was a phase change material called Plenty-Grade. Now, Plenty-Grade is, as I was mentioning a few times now, a phase change material. And if this video works, you'll have all been aware or are aware of these hand warmers. Now, our heat battery works exactly the same way. When the material is a liquid, it's just storing energy ready for use. And then when you require that energy, it just simply, the material changes phase, changes back to a solid and releases the latent heat that's held there. It's no different to what we're doing now. We're doing this all various different shapes and sizes and temperatures that we can do that we'll come on to as well. So the big thing about the phase materials is what it can do and how much energy it can actually store. And this is what makes the Sunamp such a good proposition in social housing and even in retrofits where there may be not space for cylinders. You can see from this graph that when phase change material gets to the 56 degree mark, it stops heating up, and all it starts to do then is store energy. And then when you compare that to water, which is signified in the blue line, you can see once it gets to 58 degrees, it's stored 4 times the energy that water has. And it is why is this important? It allows us to do this. So as you can see in the picture on the right hand side, it is very much a case of the Sunamp on the right hand side compared to what you would need just now in a normal hot water cylinder. It's quite a difference, quite a lot of space, as you can see. Now, the models there are 210 litre models, which is by far probably the most commonly used size within the UK. It's not the only size we do. You can see we have 4 sizes going from 70 up to 300, and the 2 in the middle are 150 and 210. Now, the big thing about doing this and making the units smaller is it drastically reduces the heat losses that comes from the unit. So we are only losing, half a kilowatt a day. For you that can remember some old copper cylinders that were, installed, they're losing 3 to 4 kilowatts a day worth of energy, and that's nothing you can do about that if you have one. It's just energy that is absolutely wasted. Yeah, it keeps your towels warm, but not much else. So the more we can save that, the better it is for everybody. So with our batteries, it's going back to renewable sources and this intermittent use of electricity. We developed these batteries so we can accept all the different kinds of renewable energy. So whether that is from heat pumps, and as Matthew used as an example, yes, we can work with ground source, we can work with air source, we can even work with heat recovery units as well if required. But more importantly, we can also work with district heat networks as well, whether it's solar PV, if you want to use it on boiler CHP heat methods, waste heat systems, or even just simply grid. Our batteries can be used in conjunction with them all. So it doesn't matter what you want to do or what's already in your house. You could use a heat battery to complement that and use it more, especially if you already have PV. So the heat battery, it isn't anything complicated. It's very, very simple. For all intents and purposes, it's a heat exchanger submerged in the phase change material that just sits there ready for use. So it is very much, the advantages of it, 3 to 4 times smaller than a comparable cylinder. It's, as I've just mentioned, it supports renewable energy use. The heat loss is lower. It is A+ rated. Not only, A+ rated for energy losses, but it's also the PCM is A rated as well, which is very important because it's when you think about batteries, all batteries are rated on the amount of cycles that they do. And where a normal lithium battery for storing electricity can work for about 10,000 cycles, our thermal store will basically have 42,000 cycles. There is a minimal degradation in the PCM. It's under 5%, which in the context of a domestic house, 42,500 cycles is equivalent to 50 years. So it is, again, I like Matthew's analogy there, where when you're thinking about using a borehole, it's for the long term. It is the same thing with our batteries. The PCM will be working after 50 years. So it's once you've done it, it's there. And as there's absolute minimal working parts, there's only 4 working parts, just a couple of thermostats, safety devices, and a PCB. That's the only things that are on it, which obviously helps when you're using it for homeowners, less maintenance, in social housing as well. There's less to go wrong, which is always advantageous to ensure people have got heating and hot water when they want it. And because it is smaller, it is easier to install. We get the exact same high flow rates that you would expect from main systems. So if somebody is converting from a gas combi boiler, for example, the flow rates to the unit will surpass that. Even if they have an unvented cylinder, the flow rates from it are exactly the same through our battery. And the other big advantage over a cylinder that's not mentioned there is the fact that because we are not storing water at a temperature, we're just storing energy to be turned into hot water, there's absolutely no risk of Legionella. So therefore, when you're not just domestics, but when you're stepping up into the industrial sizes, there is no Legionella risk at all. So again, it's a big cost saving and a big something else not to worry about. One less headache that you don't have to worry about. Everybody's safe. There is no Legionella risk. So just a couple of wee examples of where we've been used. So you can see the opportunities where you could maybe use a Sunamp battery. One of the big first ones we always usually start with is because it was a big project for Sunamp that really put us on the map a few years back, and this was the Core 364 project, where there was 7 tower blocks that needed to be upgraded. This was just in the aftermath of the Grenfell disaster. So the Gen 2, the housing provider, decided to decarbonise these blocks of flats. And the question was then, how can we do it? These were small flats, absolutely no space. Yes, there was a combi in it, but that was all the space they had. And only 2 cupboards in the whole place were in the hallway. And as you can see from the photographs, you know, the one on the left is, you can see the Kensa shoebox just fits nicely in there. There's the consumer unit above it. And the black pipes, if you can see around the back of the wall, that's the flow and returns on the group array. And then just to the left-hand side, off that wee picture, you can see the Sunamp back in the corner, which has obviously been zoomed in on the right-hand side. Now, if it wasn't for this you know, the compactness of the thermal battery, you know, that installation could not went ahead because there was nowhere to put a cylinder. You know, they couldn't build a cover, they couldn't do anything else. So it was perfect for all concerned. And you can then see some of the savings that was made by the landlord, you know, which was quite substantial. Even the tenants, you know, thanks to the sort of how energy efficient the shoebox is, and how efficient our unit is, you know, the tenants were saving £230 a year on what they're over their gas bills, you know. So it was a massive thing, and you know, and that was a few years back when electricity wasn't, you know, as expensive as it is now, and you know, maybe in the future. So if you think, you know, you multiply that now, the savings are, you know, massive. That's, you know, it could keep people out of fuel poverty. And as you say, as Matthew also mentioned, you know, it did reduce the CO2 emissions by 70%. So it was a very good project to be involved with. Another one we then did was with your homes in Newcastle. Is where we had a couple of 2-bed terraced homes. And this was slightly different, but it's where they used infrared heating panels to heat the house. But it was very much a case of, again, what do we do with the hot water? There's no point putting in the PV and you know, with in-roof arrays, the solar converter, if you're not going to take full advantage of all that PV electricity that's generated. Yes, you can supply the house, but you know, it's no benefit putting it to the grid, not for the homeowner certainly. So we looked at using the Sunamp battery. As you can see from the sort of picture there, you know, the cupboard that they had for all the services is there, so you can see the sort of units in it, and the Sunamp just very neatly fits in the corner there, which in this case will save this homeowner in the regions of probably 100 kilowatts a year over the latest unvented cylinders that are out there. So it is going to be a big saving, you know, in conjunction with the infrared panels and the controls that Wonderwall have put into the home. You know, their heating bills, you know, the energy bills for that property are minimal. So it was a fantastic wee project to be involved with, and it has now led on to, you know, Your Homes Newcastle, Belief Housing, and a few others now all starting to specify Sunamp as the sort of go-to hot water unit within their homes. So, and a brand new build one in Scotland, just nice to finish off, and probably one of the nicest sites you come across, especially the photograph there when you've got the nice sky drop, is up in Fort William, the Blairmore project done in conjunction with the Highland Council. This is where basically a whole new neighbourhood was built just on the outskirts of Fort William, and it was, you know, 117 houses for the local community, you know, and the big part of it, they wanted it to be a, you know, low carbon, you know, it was very much in an area, you know, where there was obviously no gas on it, and they wanted to prove that you could do something different. You didn't have to have oil, you didn't have to have, you know, LPG gas, you know, to have a new build in the Highlands. So they actually fitted them with the air source heat pumps. They put some roof panels on it, and there were sort of thermal batteries working with the air source heat pump. Now, what this absolutely has done is, you know, it has reduced levels of fuel poverty in the area, because it's estimated that somewhere between 40 and 60% reduction in the amount of energy they've used compared to what was originally planned using an LPG system. You know, and that's predicting to probably saving annually about 85 tonnes of CO2. So it is a big saving for the environment and for the homeowner. You know, and I suppose the good thing is, you know, it's because there's no LPG, it's helping the air quality in the area as well, especially, you want to look after the environment as much as possible. So now I just wanted to show you some pictures. I won't speak too much detail of them, but it just goes to show what can be done, even if you have minimal space available to you to where to put something. So in this picture, you can see it's in conjunction with a Daikin unit. You can see in that the cupboard that they did have to put everything, which I have to take the hats off to the plumber for managed to squeeze everything in. You can see our thermal battery, you can see the indoor unit, the volumizer for the heat pump, and even a water softener being installed for that client as well. So it leaves a very neat job, and this people, you say you need a lot of space, or you'd have to put a cylinder into the attic space or build a new cupboard for it. You don't always have to. It's very much a case of with the right equipment, you can squeeze it into a very small pace, which let that installation actually go ahead. The next one, same sort of thing. This is done with a wee project with Valent, where using the heat pump again, they wanted to maximise the PV generation. So the thermal battery was linked in with the Valent heat pump. Again, all about just saving the tenant money. And a couple of wee different scenarios here. One, our unit to the picture to the left hand side, that's a 210 litre. So as we said, even if you don't have a cupboard and you need somewhere to store hot water, the unit will fit under a worktop. So it leaves a nice neat, you're not having to make too many remedial works, and it just fits in. Next one, same as last time. You can see the sort of Valent indoor unit from the heat pump, and then just the battery and the volumizer and all the associated equipment just stuck very neatly into the corner. And if you really are need be, you can put the 3 heat batteries outside. Obviously they've sort of covered up to protect it from the cold, but it's an option for you if there is absolutely nothing else, no other options open to you. So, and just a couple of other slides before I switch off. Now, it's although sort of concentrated on hot water production, which is what everybody requires for homes as well. We now are also looking at industrial, commercial, and residential space heating, and the range we're using for that is what we're calling the central bank. So it basically comes in three sizes. The central bank home, which will be able to give space heating for properties. And the advantage of this is, when you might think we've already got an air source heat pump or a ground source heat pump. Why do I need to store energy for space heating? This can work two ways. One, it would allow you to time shift the actual load. So rather than having your heat pump running at peak times, you could still charge this battery off peak, and then use the energy from that to heat your house during your 7:30 to 9:30 in the mornings, or 5 till 7 in the evenings. It also helps people adjust to working with heat pumps, because it is a slow, gradual heat, much lower temperatures, and for people that are used to gas boilers, where they're used to just come home, it's chill in the air, they would flick the boiler on, and within 20 minutes, 25 minutes, the house would be starting to warm up. With a heat pump, that's not going to happen, especially if it's, just spring, autumn, when it's not on all the time. Having the option in the central bank home gives you that flexibility, because the heat is stored there. You turn it on and the heat will instantaneously just start, getting pushed through to the radiators. So then people can feel the heat starting to come through, and then they just get on with their daily life. And it is very much a case of, as Paul would have touched on in his lessons from the WHA, giving the people that flexibility stops people touching buttons, which can then actually cost them money, because they start to change the settings in the system. So it is a nice thing to have, which helps people transition away, from gas boilers and the sort of rapid response that the boilers give you. Moving up to a slightly bigger size is the Central Bank Mini. Now, the Central Bank Mini is, it can give you either 1,800 litres of hot water, or it can give you space heating up to 80 kilowatts. So it is there where if you did have a small mini heat network and you still want to have that flexibility, or you know, if you, and I suppose this links to the full central bank as well. You know, a lot of your heat demand is at peak times. So if you have a heat network, you know, all the homes will require a big load of heat at certain times. You know, if you can start to level out the peaks and troughs, it means you can downsize the equipment. And if you start downsizing the equipment, it becomes more efficient, you know, which makes perfect sense. You know, you're talking about, you know, a 30% reduction in the size of the, you know, your actual heat generating units. So it's absolutely something to think about. And the central bank, you can see the big shipping container there. We could give you a storage battery now in the realms of 2 megawatts worth of storage, you know, of energy, you know, and for that one in particular, you know, it's water from either, you know, 40 degrees right up to 118 degrees, you know, so we could basically create a PCM that would do nearly every single, you know, need for space heating that we normally have in the UK. So that's me. So let's pass you back to Emma. And please, if you've got any questions, by all means, please just put them in the chat box.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. That was really great. So that's us. We've heard from all of our speakers this afternoon. We will move on to the Q&A session in just a second. And thank you for those who have posted them in the chat. Any more, just keep them coming. I'm just going to really quickly share, there's quite a lot happening in the kind of low carbon heat sector for Scotland and from Scottish Enterprise this week and over the coming weeks. So I just wanted to highlight some of those events for you. Some are online events, webinars, and some are in-person events, which is really exciting. So if you bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to share my screen. And I'll just quickly talk through those. So actually tomorrow there is a Scottish Enterprise webinar, which is an introduction to the Green Heat Hub Grand Challenge. So if you use the QR code there, and there'll also be a link in the chat and circulated in the email tomorrow, you'll be able to join that webinar to find out more about this grand challenge as part of the Decarbonising Heat National Programme from Scottish Enterprise. And this is asking for industry collaborations with either academia or third sector to come forward with their ideas on what a green heat hub for Scotland should be, again, to support the decarbonising heat agenda. Next up is the Scottish Enterprise Green Heat Accelerator. There is a workshop available and open to potential applicants to that 12-week accelerator programme that will kick off in October. It's open to Scottish SMEs in the low carbon heating and cooling sector who are looking for support and advice, kind of soft business skills, but also sector related information. So if you'd like to join that webinar, you can do so by using the QR code below. Next up, also on Thursday this week in the morning, there is the Scottish Enterprise European Clean Energy Transition Partnership webinar. So this will give an overview of the CETP, which is the European Fund, which is opening in the 13th of September. So you'll be able to join the Scottish Enterprise webinar on Thursday to find out more about what the support is going to be and what the kind of overall joint call should look like. Then the official joint call opens on the 13th, and you can use that link there, CET Partnership, to join that official webinar to find out some more about the different kind of work programs there. And then we have our first in-person HeatSource event, which is taking place in Fort William at the Advanced Manufacturing Centre. So we're working with the Advanced Manufacturing Challenge Fund projects, looking at decarbonising heat supply chain opportunities in the Highlands and Islands. So you'll get an opportunity to come along, hear from some speakers who have recently pivoted and diversified their business to a low carbon heat offering. You'll be able to get a tour of the Advanced Manufacturing Centre facilities there and find out about support from the PNDC, from the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland, and also find out more about the Make It Smart Hub decarbonising and construction programme, get a bit hands-on with some different technologies there. So again, registration's open for that, so it would be great if we could see you in Fort William on the 27th of September. And then just a couple of days later, there is a heating up the pipeline, how to accelerate heat network deployment and projects in Scotland, and that's taking place in Edinburgh. And then there is the Scotland's Manufacturing and Supply Chain Conference official exhibition at the SEC on the 13th of October. So any of you from industry that would like to take part in that, then you can find out some more information about registration and exhibiting at that using that link. And then finally, at the end of October, we have Best Fest, so Built Environment Smarter Transformation, the Festival of the Built Environment, of the Zero Carbon Built Environment, in fact, is taking place as a month-long festival and diary of events taking place in October. And the flagship conference, we'll be hearing from Chris Stark from the Committee on Climate Change, and that's taking place here at Built Environment Smarter Transformation at Hamilton International Technology Park. Again, just click on that link, use the QR code, and you'll be able to register for that. Lots of great TED Talks and lots of workshops in the afternoon too. And then finally, I just wanted to draw your attention, so if you weren't aware, the second consultation on the new build heat standards is currently open and closing at the end of October. The Scottish Government are seeking thoughts and opinions on the new build heat standards, which basically, there's a link in the chat that's been added there. So that is the new legislation that is to come into play in 2024 that states that any new buildings consented from 2024 will not be able to have a direct emissions heat source, so basically essentially no fossil fuels. So they will require low carbon or zero emissions heating systems to be installed. Scottish Government are seeking opinions on that policy, so it's an opportunity for you to have your say on that. So with that in mind, there's just a really quick poll that we're going to do. It'd be interesting to hear how many of you have already responded to the new build heat standard consultation. So yes, would you like to find out more before you decide, or are you planning to but you've just not got around to it, or not aware of it, or not applicable to you? But hopefully it's applicable to everyone in our audience, and yeah, hopefully now that you can, or that you know about it, that you'll take part in that. Fantastic. Well, great. So plenty of you that weren't aware that was open. So yeah, please do have a read at the consultation and have your say, either at an individual level or an organisational level. Any insights that you can provide, Scottish Government will go a long way to influencing that policy. So yeah, just inviting all of our attendees to turn their cameras back on, our panellists to turn their cameras back on, and thanks again for some great presentations. And we do have a few questions, so bear with me 1 second. I'll just find that. So yes, typically, cost is on everyone's mind at the moment. Cost of energy and general kind of cost of living issues. So the first question from Said says, heat pumps are good but expensive. What is the solution for the costs? Now, I'm unsure whether that's a kind of larger scale that we would kind of discuss today, or a smaller scale. But yeah, if anyone has any opinions or insights on that.
I can give you a consumer perspective as somebody that's done it. You have to weigh it up a bit more broadly. The heat pump is a fairly small portion of the cost of deploying a heat pump, is the first thing. So the total capital cost might be £4,000 or £5,000 for the heat pump and £15,000 for the total install. Making the heat pump cheaper doesn't make that terribly much more attractive. It's about making the total system simpler. I was very taken by David Wright's presentation, the bit that had a pod outside with all the kit in it. That could be off-site manufactured and done much, much quicker. The second thing to bear in mind is that when you weigh up the cost of owning a heat pump, about 80% of that is the cost of electricity over the 15 or 20 years. So to say the heat pump is too expensive is the wrong way of looking at it. Frankly, I don't think you'll ever get the cost of deploying heat pumps low enough that enough of the general public will be paying up cash for these sort of systems. There is really good support at the moment, but I think what we need to get to is where you can go to Scottish Power or E.ON or whoever it is and say, sign me up for a heat pump, I'll pay you a monthly fee for the next 10 or 15 years, and they're doing the deployments and they're making the investments in, might be insulation or it might be PV panels. I think treating it as a capital purchase is always going to be in a fairly narrow stream for that. So I think we got to ask the question a slightly different way, is my independent consumer perspective on it.
Great, thanks, Dave. Anyone else, David or Matthew, have you got any kind of thoughts on that?
Oh, you want to go right now? Thank you, Matthew. No, it's, you know, and that's the big thing. I think it's, you know, David makes a very valid point. You know, just because the capital outlay seems a lot at the beginning, you have to take it a far broader view, you know, a far longer term view of what you can save. You know, it is, you're right, a heat pump will never be £300 that you've bought a boiler for in the past. You know, it is very much a case of, don't just take one figure at the start to what you can save. Think about it over 20 years, because, you know, the install cost, whether you're fitting a boiler or fitting a heat pump, you know, is near enough the same. You know, it is a small part. So just think longer term rather than just a one-off outlay.
Great, Matthew, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I would sort of consider the sort of market transition like other markets. You know, when mobile phones first came out, hardly anybody had one, and they were really, really expensive. However, now everybody has one. They pay a monthly subscription for a mobile phone, and you know, so, and that's the kind of rate of scale that we need to see everything scaling up to is akin to that. Everything changing so quickly that happens. I think there will be some cost saving when demand comes, but at the moment, you know, it might take us a few hours to make a heat pump, but it takes us a hell of a lot longer to sell a heat pump. So, you know, if that demand is there, then, you know, then there may be some cost savings.
That's great, thank you so much. And obviously, if Saeed is asking from a consumer perspective, then yeah, check out Home Energy Scotland in terms of their kind of loans and different grant funding information that may be suitable, but also Business Energy Scotland. So for any SMEs on the call, if you're looking to deploy a heat pump in your own premises, then yeah, check out Business Energy Scotland as well. We can get some grants and some information there on funding support. So next question is from Simon, and it's for Matthew specifically. So it says, for additional heat sources, what would you say the threshold levels of heat, power and delivery temperature are to be viable to integrate to a heat network?
Yeah, I'm not sure entirely that I understand the question completely, but what I would say is that quite often with our systems, people imagine a heat network to be one massive big pipe going round thousands of houses. In our installations, it's quite often clustered. It just depends on the technical variables and the space and what it is that we're heating. Every project is different, but quite often when we do shared ground loop arrays, we'll do separate clusters, and it gives more resilience because they're not all interconnected into one big main of cold pipe. When we're doing it in different heat sources, if we're doing open loop, that's obviously a bit different. But I can't give you any hard technical information about that at the moment. But feel free to pick up the phone and get in touch, and we can have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully that answers your question, Simon. But if you do have any kind of follow up from a technical perspective, then yeah, do get in touch with Matthew. So the next one says, thank you for the presentations. They were great and informative. But what do you think is needed to do a large-scale district heating pilot in Scotland? You know, for example, sort of 2,000 to 3,000 public, business and domestic buildings all being linked. Anyone want to come on that?
Sounds a bit like me. It was in the presentation. There's only two things to make this market really drive. The first is anybody doing that has to have the certainty that these 2,000 to 3,000 buildings are going to buy heat from that network. So there's no point building it and then saying, does anybody fancy this heat? Because they might say no. The price might be wrong, or they might just have something else to do that day, or whatever. Apathy is perhaps our biggest barrier. So tackling the demand piece first, and that comes partly with legislation, partly with, there's all sorts of pressures in business to do their SECR audits and show how they're getting the carbon footprint down. So create an absolutely solid and irrefutable demand is the first bit. And the second bit, and it's part of the first bit as well, is come up with a business model that's attractive. And if anybody was saying to me, do you know, let's just say I was the Hilton Hotel. I always pick on this, Matt will laugh because he's heard me say it a million times. If I was the Hilton Hotel in Glasgow and somebody knocked on my door and said, would you like heat from our district heating network rather than burning gas? I would say, well, yeah, probably. I would then say, how much is that going to cost? And if they said 20 pence per kilowatt hour, I'd probably say, well, gas is cheaper than that, or maybe not quite at the moment, but it's all about the price of it. And you can't have the price of this unless you know the price of the electricity. So there's two things going to happen in the electricity market. Either the rules are going to get fixed so that we are buying electricity in the centre of Glasgow from Whiteley's wind farm at approximately 5 pence per kilowatt hour plus a transmission charge of say 20%, which makes it 6 pence. And then you've got a fighting chance of doing either small or big heat pumps at, you know, the operating cost of about 2 pence per kilowatt hour, which when you factor in all the capital costs will wash through as a reasonable price for heat. And then the guy in the Hilton Hotel will say, yeah, you know, 5 pence or 6 pence or whatever it is, that's an okay deal. Come back to me when you're ready in 2 years or 3 years and let's do it. Or if we don't get the rules fixed, we'll start seeing private wire schemes popping up where people, and we're already seeing that some of our clients are getting private wire arrangements over 7 or 8, 10 kilometers from a nearby PV farm in one case, and I'm sure there's others that are doing it with wind farms, and effectively saying the grid rules are rubbish. I'm going to bypass them and put my own cable in, and I'm going to make a contract peer-to-peer to buy the electricity, and you'll probably get it for about, somewhere between 8 and 10 pence per kilowatt hour. And there'll be some caveats, i.e. if it's not windy, you can't have any because I haven't got any to give you. But if it's then 10p per kilowatt hour and we divide that by the efficiency of the heat pump, we're back down into that low single digit operating cost, and you've got a chance of doing it. So the only two things needed for a big scale is A, sort out the demand so it's absolutely certain, absolutely nailed on that people will buy it, and B, come up with a way of making sure the operating cost of whatever the solution is an attractive price, because there's no point bending people's arms if it's 2 or 3 times the cost of burning gas. That's just leads to dissent. So very simple in some respects, but not just quite round the corner just yet, because we have been saying this for a while.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, thanks, Dave. And hopefully the heat network kind of policies that are sort of around the corner that we'll be looking to try to influence kind of some of that. And I know that there are kind of plenty of working groups and lots of consultation ongoing with Scottish Government and Scottish Renewables in particular around that. So fingers crossed there's a good direction of travel on that.
I'll add one thing, Emma. It's fascinating to me, and I'm not going to say any particular names, but it's fascinating to me that parts of the government, including the government buildings, are able to kick this decarbonisation thing down the road a little bit and not actually do it. They're under strict obligations as part of the government to decarbonise, whether it's a school or a hospital or the local authorities, or whether it's the government buildings, Victoria Quay, for example, that sits on the dock in Leith. We've got to start taking this seriously and doing it. And the problem is that it's all ties back to the electricity price. So there's a very legitimate reason that people aren't doing it. It's because the electricity price is out of whack, and that's an Ofgem and BEIS thing. because it's a reserve matter. It's not a political statement. It's just it's a practical observation of the policy. So fix the price of electricity, and you'll see lots of heat pumps.
Great, thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like I really think that the pricing will drive everything. It's like, you know, if somebody has an electric car now, the price that they're going to save on buying diesel and petrol almost makes it a no-brainer if they can afford to get an electric car in the first place. But I think it definitely will be driven by that running cost price, and if we can do things to help that, like move environmental levies from electricity to gas and provide some sort of flexibility using time of use, and influence the running costs, then I think people will start installing heat pumps, as well as the carrots. We need the stick as well, so we need to make it virtually impossible to buy a gas boiler as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for your insights on that. That's really appreciated. So I do have a question for David specifically, and the question is there a need for any additional support due to the weight of the Sunamp unit?
No, absolutely none at all. Although our units do come pre-filled, you know, it is obviously the weight increase after that is only a couple of kilos, you know. So when you compare that to an unvented cylinder, it is actually lighter. So unless you're going to put some additional weight consideration in for a standard cylinder that you would fit, there's no need to do anything different for one of our units. So.
Perfect. And you did mention in your presentation a little bit about solar and kind of maximising solar. Is that sort of something that you would see kind of, you know, lots of social housing have solar panels installed? So, you know, in terms of maximising that and being able to influence some of the kind of heating and hot water challenges, would you see that the kind of Sunamp's a good next step?
Yeah, that's it. It's an easy next step, you know, and pretty a cost-effective one of being able to, you know, rather than put the electricity going to earth or going back to the grid, you know, it is stored within the house, you know, rather than the people using their immersion to, you know, heat the hot water. It is there for them. The other part you can use off it is, even if the home isn't ready to be converted to a heat pump as yet, you know, our units can be used in conjunction with a gas combi boiler, you know, so the PV could still be preheating, you know, that are storing the energy or battery to preheat the water that goes through the combi boiler, you know. So it's not just a case of, you know, you must have this and use a Sunamp. There are, you know, low cost options available now, so we can, you know, again, absolutely maximise the amount of solar PV, you know, that's generated for use all year round.
So kind of that step change, kind of if a new boiler is maybe only, you know, 2 years old or something like that, a gas boiler, then, you know, a Sunamp unit, and then being ready for larger scale deployment of heat pumps later on. Yes, it's an interesting one to keep in mind. Sorry, I'm just finding probably just one more question actually, because we do have quite a lot in there. So if I do find what I'll do, I'll circulate the questions to our speakers, and then I'll get back to everyone on that. So a question from Simon again, asking what is the heat source for Queen's Quay, and what temperature does the source deliver to the heat pump, and is it single stage or multi-stage?
It's the Clyde estuary, and it varies from about +4 degrees to about +21 degrees winter summer, and that system is 2 parallel systems, each are single stage.
Great, thank you for that quick technical overview on that answer to that question. But like I say, there's a few more questions that we haven't quite got around to, so I'll make sure that we circulate them to our panel and have answers that will be put in the email from everyone. So we're at the end of our webinar this afternoon. Thanks again to Dave, Matthew, and David for speaking, you know, and hopefully we presented a variety of heat technologies, but also applications in terms of size, from kind of district heating to individual dwellings, from new build to retrofit. You can see that these low carbon technologies are can be applied to any and all situations, and hopefully we've inspired you as an audience to either get involved with taking part in the consultation or any of the upcoming webinars and events that we have and that are being offered by Scottish Enterprise. But yes, thank you again. There's plenty of links in the chat to get in touch, and some information there about Dave's Walk to COP27 event. And yes, look out for our newsletter tomorrow. You can sign up at heatsource.org, and we send out a monthly roundup of events and news for the sector. So that's us finished for this afternoon. Thanks to our audience for taking part and for your questions. And again, finally, our panel. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.